Hello and welcome back to another unit review for Star Wars Legion, and boy does it feel good to be back on track with things like this, as aside from those two heavy releases from winter 2021, I really haven't had any units to dive in and cover in depth with our traditional unit reviews. However, with our new Wookie Warrior cross-faction expansion, we are going to be getting 3 new units for the Republic, along with 2 more in the Yoda expansion as they snuck in Chewbacca alongside him. So all of a sudden my production schedule got a lot more busy, and I'm probably going to end up saying the word Wookie more this July than I will for the rest of my life combined. But with this new Wookie Warrior cross-faction expansion, we are not only getting the classic melee-oriented Wookie Warriors ported over to the Republic faction, but both the Republic and Rebels are going to receive a new unit, one that is going to be more ranged-oriented, and they will be called the Kashyyyk Defenders for the Republic and the Kashyyyk Resistance for the Rebels. And while this unit is somewhat similar in stats to the traditional Wookie Warriors, it is definitely its own beast, no pun intended, though these more ranged-oriented Wookiees are going to be identical units for both the Republic and the Rebels, meaning this unit review is going to apply to both Republic and Rebel players. But let's go ahead and take a look at this new Kashyyyk Defender or Resistance unit card and see what makes them different from those traditional Wookiee Warriors. And as always, we are going to start on the left-hand side of the card and circle our way around, and then get into the GUI center keywords at the end. And right off the bat, we are going to have a 72-point 3-model Special Forces unit. And right off the bat, that is going to be a little bit disappointing that these guys are Special Forces. I feel like if any Wookiees in the game were to be core options, it would be these ranged-oriented Wookiees. And unfortunately, it's looking like it's going to pan out to be that you cannot run an entire Wookiee list, as you will need some clones in there as your core options. But after that, we're going to notice that this is a 3-man squad coming in at 72 points, meaning these guys are not going to have that same points reduction that the original Wookiee Warriors have, and they will cost 1 more point per model, which may seem rather insignificant, but it is going to add up over time. And I'm actually not a big fan of this minuscule points increase on this unit, as I do think it is the inferior of the 2 Wookiee Warriors. But below that, we are going to have a heavy weapons upgrade slot here, which is not only going to make use of that bowcaster that we saw in the original Wookiee Warriors box, but also 2 new heavy weapon options that this new cross-faction expansion is going to be giving us. Below that, we're going to see that the Kashyyyk Defenders only have 1 training upgrade slot, which is in contrast to the traditional Wookiee Warriors 2 training upgrade slots. And I have to say, this is another major blow to this unit card right off the bat, as these Wookiees make fantastic use of those training upgrade slots, and having just 1 training upgrade slot here is really going to limit how flexible you can make this unit, and it's going to kind of force you to really lean in to that dedicated range combat role, and keep you from doing both good range combat and melee by taking an extra upgrade such as tenacity, along with some of the other ranged-oriented upgrades we will take a look at later. But after that, we have the gear upgrade slot, which is always welcome on range units who have large dice pools. And of course, that's mainly because of my favorite upgrade card that we are going to take a look at later. And lastly here, we are going to have grenades, which is always a bit of a superfluous upgrade slot. And really, I don't think you're going to be utilizing this as much on this build of Wookiees as you would on the traditional Wookiee Warriors, as those Wookiees are definitely the more in-your-face variant, but still, it's here nonetheless. Moving over to the right-hand side of the card, we're going to see that the Wookiees have a white defense die, followed up by 3 wounds per model and 2 courage. Below that, we're going to see that they do have an offensive surge to hit, but no defensive surge, meaning you're basically going to be having a 6+ armor save on this unit, and much like the other Wookiee units in this game, it's a bit of an Achilles heel for them. Yes, they do have very large health pools, but it's pretty easy to chew through them, meaning Wookiees do not do very well when they are under focused fire. So there is definitely going to be an emphasis on getting these guys in cover, and perhaps fielding other units that can feed them dodge tokens or provide the Guardian keyword, such as with Obi-Wan Kenobi. But below that, the Wookiees are of course going to be speed 2, which is pretty standard for trooper units, and they are going to have a melee attack of 1 black and 1 white dice, which is definitely a downgrade from that traditional Wookiee Warrior Reek Blade, which gives you 2 black dice instead, but still, this is definitely not a melee attack to scoff at, especially when you consider that surge to hit. But after that, we are going to have the X1 Carbine, or Carbine, or Carbon. Go ahead and argue in the comment section down below over which it is, which is going to be throwing 2 white dice at range 1 to 3. So with all of our baseline stats wrapped up here, this overall unit card is pretty much a flat downgrade from the regular Wookiee warriors, with the exception of that increased range on their ranged attack. But for 1 point more per model, you're going to be losing a training slot. Your melee is going to drop down from a black die to a white die, as is the dice pool with your ranged weapon. Not exactly ideal, but of course there are still keywords that we need to look at, as they are again tweaked for this unit to be more ranged oriented. But with these stats as they stand, I'm looking at a unit that is very much a high quantity, low quality dice unit, and funnily enough in some ways is almost like a beefed up B1 battle droid squad, who's going to be throwing a ton of white dice, whether they are attacking or defending, who will be boosted by fishing for offensive surges, and use that high wound count to stay on the battlefield, while your opponent's red armor dice are hopefully flubbed. But moving along to the keywords for this unit, we are going to have the Indomitable keyword, a mainstay on all Wookiee characters who is going to allow you to roll red defense dice instead of white defense die when determining if you're going to be losing suppression tokens. And when you combine this keyword with Courage 2, you're going to have a lot more control over suppression, which is going to make certain upgrades like Duck and Cover a lot more valuable on a unit that really does need it. It's also going to allow these Wookiees to operate somewhat more independently from the rest of your force, as they won't need to always rely on that commander courage to make sure your points investments aren't running off the field. After that, the Wookiees are going to have the Scale keyword, which is always a nice little bonus, which may help this unit either get into a better firing position, or perhaps score an objective, without being penalized for doing so. And lastly, we are going to have the Sharpshooter 1 keyword, which is definitely an awesome keyword to have on any ranged combat unit, especially a ranged combat unit who's not throwing the best quality dice, as you're really going to want to squeeze through every hit you can, especially when you throw keywords like Pierce into the mix. So overall, those keywords do add a little bit more to the Wookiees here. They will be a decent squad who can operate somewhat independently from your force and potentially close down some more isolated flanks. And that Sharpshooter keyword is going to help a lot, as you really need every bonus you can get when you're throwing that many white dice. But with the overall unit card wrapped up, let's go ahead and start looking at some upgrade options for these Kashyyyk resistance fighters, and that is going to be starting with the new unique Wookiee heavy weapons, the first of which is going to be a two-sided card, one that you flip at the beginning of your activation, and that is going to be the Battle Shield Wookiee coming in at 26 points. And right off the bat, I gotta say, this card is probably more of a retrofit for the old school Wookiee warriors, rather than something that's going to be taken on these new ranged Wookiee warriors, as it is definitely more melee based. And essentially, this card is going to have two sides, one that's going to give you 2 extra red melee dice, and the other, which is a defensive stance, that's going to decrease your overall speed by 1, and give you the Armor 1 keyword, in addition with 2 black melee dice. And while I did say this card is pretty melee oriented, it is actually a pretty dynamic upgrade, one that's going to have pros and cons, whether it's on a melee or ranged oriented unit. And for the sake of this video, we are going to be talking about the later, and the obvious appeal here is the fact that this card is going to give you Armor 1, which is greatly going to help the durability of your Wookiees, who are going to be desperate for various ways to up their survivability. Also, with your ranged attack being range 3, you're not going to be too worried about that mobility handicap, as it is something that you can work around, especially when you consider that this card can simply flip when you're not within range of your opponents, and then activate once you're on the front lines and hunker down behind cover. But with no ranged attack, it really is hard for me to justify taking the Shield Warrior, as at that point you will be paying over 100 points for a unit that's only going to be throwing 6 white dice, which in my opinion is a very poor use of resources. So again, I will iterate that I really don't think it's worth taking the shield upgrade on this unit, as it's definitely more of a retrofit for the classic Wookiee warriors than it is the new Kashyyyk defenders. After that, we are getting a new ranged weapon for the Wookiee warriors, and that is going to be the Wookiee long gun, and this is going to be a range 1-4 weapon with the suppressive keyword throwing 2 black dice. And when you consider that at 26 points, it's just 2 points more than a standard Wookiee warrior, this is a pretty awesome upgrade to add to the squad, as it's going to increase that overall range, give you some more reliable dice, and finally start to add some more unique keywords into your weapon profile that's going to give this unit a little bit more of a battlefield identity. And when you look at this weapon alongside things like the Phase 2 Mortar Trooper, there may be a long-range suppression synergy that is going to start forming for the Republic faction, but when you look at how expensive all these upgrades are going to be, I don't really see that gimmick being a game-winning factor, at least not for the time being. Still, this is a pretty cool card that is worth keeping your eyes on, and it's definitely not the worst upgrade in this slot. However, we are going to have the original bowcaster that can be equipped onto this squad, and if you recall from those original Wookiee warriors, this is a range 1 to 3 weapon, throwing a red and white die, backed up by the impact and pierce 1 keyword. And this one really is going to be the winner for this upgrade slot. Not only does that range profile perfectly match those X1 carbines, but Pierce is a universally good keyword, one that doesn't need to synergize with an entire army in order for it to be effective. You're also going to be getting that much more reliable red dice here, backed up by an extra white die, which is going to help contribute to that overall high volume firepower. And while 2 black dice on that long gun might be a little bit more reliable, that singular red die should be a solid enough anchor when backed up by surge to hits to make sure you're landing enough hits, again backed up by sharpshooter 1, to sneak that pierce through. So at 31 points, the bowcaster is going to be the most expensive upgrade of the 3, but it's really going to bring the keywords that you need onto this unit in order to make them threatening enough to justify that special forces slot. But after our heavy weapon upgrades, we are going to move along and take a look at the training upgrades that I would recommend taking on these ranged Wookiee units. And there are a few good ones here, even if you are strictly down to focusing on ranged attacks, making it once again a shame that you only get 1 training upgrade slot, as it is a pretty competitive one on the Wookiees. But first up here, we are going to have Duck and Cover. At just 4 points, this is a fantastic upgrade that's going to increase the durability of a unit that you're really not going to like rolling armor saves for. And with Courage 2 and the Indomitable keyword, you're not really going to struggle to keep that suppression in check, making this upgrade all the more ideal. But next up, we are going to have the Hunter training upgrade, one of our aim token generating upgrades. And at 6 points, this one is a little bit pricey and I tend to stay away from it. However, these Wookiees, when equipped with that bowcaster and pierce, are really going to be encouraged to engage heroes and other multi-wound units, and even armored vehicles with that impact 1 keyword. So much like Duck and Cover, there is a few extra things going on with the Hunter upgrade on these Wookiee warriors that makes it a stronger contender than it would be on other units. And again, it is a major shame you only have 1 training upgrade slot, as having both of these upgrades on a Wookiee warrior unit would help compensate those weak dice both defensively and offensively. But again, unfortunately, we do have to choose one, and honestly, I am leaning a little bit more towards Duck and Cover. But after that, we are going to take a look at Offensive Push, a card that is always on the table for any ranged combat unit, as this card is always good to pop on that first turn when you're moving to engage your opponents, allowing you to get into position and have that aim token when you're shooting. So if you wish to utilize that singular training slot in a more offensive manner, and you either don't want to spend the extra points on Hunter or don't think there's going to be enough multi-wound models to reliably trigger it, Offensive Push is going to be all reliable, though again, I am still a little bit partial to Duck and Cover. But that is going to wrap up our training upgrades and move us along to the gear upgrades, of which I am just going to recommend targeting scopes. Again, these Kashyyyk defenders are going to be a high quantity, low quality dice attack, and you will absolutely be making use of aim tokens, probably even a lot of them, which makes this upgrade very much worth it. And whenever a unit starts throwing more than 6 dice, be it black or white, I definitely recommend taking targeting scopes to further boost your chance of scoring hits throughout the course of the match. But after gear, we are going to have our grenade upgrade slot, and like I said earlier, this is something I would probably prefer using on the regular Wookiee warriors, as they definitely are more fine-tuned to that close range combat, but still, we are going to take a look at the upgrades here anyways, even though I would mostly recommend avoiding them. Now, the first up here is going to be everyone's favorite fragmentation grenades. These are just a flat-out good range 1 attack with red dice and surge to crits. Throw a few of these alongside that bowcaster attack, and your opponent is definitely going to be smacked around a bit. But in my opinion, if your opponent is close enough for a range 1 attack, they are probably close enough for melee, which these Wookiees do not want to find themselves in. But after that, we are going to have the Smoke Grenade upgrade card, one that I very rarely recommend. But again, these Wookiees are going to be a high wound unit that really wants to avoid rolling those defensive dice, and being able to simply deploy cover in a situation where you might find a lot of firepower coming your way could prove to be invaluable. So this could be a workaround for that lack of a second training slot. Should you want to take a more offensive card like Hunter, using smoke grenades could be your failsafe for that poor armor save compensation, and I really do think this is going to work out a lot better on these Wookiee warriors than it would on most traditional units. However, when I say that, I don't exactly mean that the Wookiees have to be the ones throwing the grenade, but rather that they are going to really need the benefit a lot more than other units. And if you do plan on massing these ranged Kashyyyk defenders, it may definitely be worth having one squad throw smoke grenades down each turn, again to leverage that higher wound count. But that is going to wrap up all of the upgrades that I would recommend taking on this unit, including some of the new upgrades that this box set is going to grant this squad and the traditional Wookiee warriors, and move us along to the recommended builds. Though I really do only have one recommended build for you guys here. I know I usually like to show off some more fun and thematic builds alongside some of the more meta ones, but I really do think there is only one way to field these guys, and more or less one way to play them, and that is going to be the Skirmisher build that I'm recommending here. And of course, this squad is going to be built around that bowcaster heavy weapon upgrade. Pierce is just too good of a keyword for you to turn your head on, and it overall does just synergize very well with this unit and gives them some much needed keywords to up their lethality. Now, you could perhaps sub out the long gun here, especially if you want to try out a more suppression oriented list, and that range 4 suppression keyword is super useful, and you could potentially lock down a more desolate flank with it, but it's an uphill battle against that Pierce 1 and Impact 1 keyword, and the Wookiee Shield Warrior upgrade definitely is a big no-go for me here, for reasons we discussed earlier. And following up that Bowcaster Warrior, we are going to have the Duck and Cover training upgrade, and this is just going to increase the overall durability of your Wookiees. They will still need to find aim tokens elsewhere to remedy that high white dice pool, but I do think it's a bit more important to keep them from getting wiped off the field, especially if your opponent really decides to focus fire on them. As we mentioned throughout the course of this video, one hit on these Wookiees is likely one wound, and you really want to avoid rolling those defensive dice. But lastly, we are of course going to have our gear upgrade slot that is going to be the coveted targeting scopes. This of course is going to make your aims better and further mitigate any bad luck that you might receive when trying to get that pierce through. So overall, with this Skirmisher build, we are going to have a unit that is tooled out to do exactly that. These guys are meant to be either operating on a more isolated flank, where you might perhaps run into 1 or 2 enemy squads, or to back up your frontline forces, who will hopefully be absorbing more firepower with better armor saves, while these Wookiees sneak wounds through on high priority targets with that Pierce keyword. And really, I think that is the one true way to play these Kashyyyk defenders. I don't think they're going to be smashing into your opponent's ranks like the old school Wookiee warriors would. Their offensive dice are just a lot more meek, and you really are squeezing in every keyword you can get here, just to have them firing on a level that is more competent than a B1 battle droid squad. And while I would say they certainly do achieve that task, they don't really do it in stride, and you will have to finesse this unit as a commander and leverage them appropriately on the battlefield, otherwise they will get vaporized quickly and not put in nearly as much damage as another 106 point unit would. And that is going to bleed in over to our overall unit score and what I think about these new Kashyyyk defenders and Kashyyyk resistance. It is definitely cool that we got to see a ranged variant of the Wookiee warriors, but as you can probably tell, I think they are the inferior of the two, and I think it is going to be hard to justify taking them in that special forces slot, especially in a faction that has access to ARC troopers. And overall, I think this unit does somewhat suffer from what I would call fleet trooper syndrome, where you have that Pierce keyword, which acts as a sort of carrot at the end of a stick, enticing us Legion players to try and make this unit work, despite having overall a relatively mediocre damage output. And yes, these Wookiee warriors do have range 3, which is one of the biggest drawbacks of fleet troopers, but you're definitely paying for that. And at 106 points, you can go ahead and get yourself a 6-man Phase 2 squad with a Z6 and targeting scopes. So overall, I don't think this is going to be a very popular unit, and I think I'm being somewhat generous when I give it a ranking of C. Now, I do think this unit would be viable if it was made into a core trooper squad, which would also kick off the Wookiees as a first sub-faction introduced to the game, but I don't really see that happening anytime soon, and for the time being, I think these guys will take the backseat for the traditional Wookiee warriors. But let me know what you guys think in the comments section down below. Do you think I'm undervaluing this unit, or are there any synergies that I might be missing here? But as always, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, as we will have more Kashyyyk Wave videos coming out in the near future. And as always guys, until next time, take care.